Voices of the Erased, where I share information related to the loving bonds of children and parents being erased and the consequences of this trauma. We're going to take a look at the article in today's Parental Alienation Daily. You can see here on the front page on the right, if you'd like to have these articles and this paper delivered to your email, there's a sign up right there for your email address. Let's take a look at our Invisible No Longer, recognizing and meeting the needs of alienated children and families. And this is a post by Karen Woodall, filled with great information. Yesterday, the collective memo of concern, authored by Linda Nielsen and signed by people opposed to parental alienation, being included in ICD 11. And for those in the United States, that's the equivalent of our DSM. It was reposted on that site in an effort to influence removal of the words parental alienation. I reread that collective memo of concern and noted the names of the people who oppose the inclusion of parental alienation. Many from the UK are familiar to me as they are feminist academics with a long-standing influence on the lives of families in divorce and separation. These people have sought to prevent a closer examination of the experiencing of loss of a child after family separation for all the time that I've been working in this field. I wondered why there's such vehement rejection of the reality that a child who is rejecting a parent after family separation without having been harmed by that parent is a child at risk. The answer, of course, is something those who come here to read are well aware of. I've been raising this red flag for all the time I've been doing this work. In the field of divorce and separation, the promotion of child's needs as being synonymous with women's rights has been the driving force behind the lack of attention paid to alienated children and their families. The focus on women first and children as part of that campaign has led to generations of children around the world not only being denied a relationship with a healthy father after separation, it has now also led to children being denied relationships with their healthy mother. Parental alienation does not respect gender. When it occurs, it happens as often to mothers as it does fathers. The Family Separation Clinic disaggregates cases by gender, and in the decade of 2009 to 2019, the balance of work with alienated mothers and fathers was 46% mothers and 54% fathers. In line with other evidence of parental alienation as a non-gendered issue, this tells us that the problem impacting on families is far more complex than the feminist academics would have us believe. In fact, it is so complex that the very women that the denial of parental alienation is supposed to support are not only being alienated from their children, their experience is being ignored or being dismissed. And it just makes me think about there's groups that are either about father's rights or parents' rights. And folks, this is an issue for the children and about the children. It's not gender-based on the parents. We need to get that message out. Alienated children's experiences are simply invisible in this landscape and have been for 4 or more decades since the divorce laws changed in the Western world in the 70s. Since then, children's needs have been enmeshed in policy and practice with the rights of their mothers, and the result has been a holocaust of loss in terms of relationships between children and one side of their family. The experience of children suffering from induced psychological splitting, which is also known as parental alienation, is truly ghastly, and its impact on their lives and that of their family is beyond conceptualizing in words. The longer I've worked with alienated children, the closer I've come to their lived experience, and it is truly, in my view, a scandal that has been allowed to go on for decades without any real attention being paid to their needs. And there it is. Alienated children suffer from the induced defense of psychological splitting, which places them at the center of a family crisis in which they, as a child, are burdened with the horrific responsibility of resolving it. So much for youngsters, you know? In this landscape, the rejected parent is a helpless bystander while the parent to whom the child becomes aligned plays out their own resolved issues through the distortion of the parent-child relationship. The child, in the midst of this, induced to utilize a defense mechanism which triggers the fracturing of the self and the parents into good and bad. Now, the child is in charge, omnipotent, weaponized to deliver the most devastating impact upon the parent who is the recipient of the projected shadow side of the fused parent-child idealized dyad. We're copying that sentence or that paragraph. In this trauma story, parent and child are now set against the demonized parent, and what follows based upon the design and delivery of a feminist workforce around the family is a truly ghastly witch hunt process of blame, shame, and institutional ignorance of what is really happening to the child. The collective memo of concern simply reinforces that ignorance and seeks to shift the focus away from children and back to women. It also seeks to demonize parental alienation and skew the argument towards the idea that seeking to understand why a child rejects a parent in the post-separation landscape is akin to child abuse. Because it validates violence against women and girls, it does not. And here's why. Parental alienation is a catch-all phrase for a child's unjustified rejection of a parent, but it is, at its heart, it is not about the rejection of a parent. It is about the child being induced to use the defense of psychological splitting. The rejection of a parent is simply a byproduct of that. It's not the cause. Neither is high conflict the reason a child rejects a parent who has been shown to be loving and healthy, although it may appear that conflict is part of the landscape where the child will reject. Many children live through high conflict divorce without being induced to use the defense of splitting. The conflict seen in cases of alienation arises largely from the desperate attempts by the rejected parent to flag, stop, or tell someone about what is happening to their child. How about that? Let's read that sentence again. The conflict seen in cases of alienation arises largely from the desperate attempts by the rejected parent, the target parent, to flag, stop, or tell someone about what is happening to their child. They're screaming for help. No one is listening. In my experience, induced psychological splitting in a child arises because the child is exposed to unhealthy behaviors in one parent, which threaten the child with abandonment if they do not align their views, and which enmeshes the child into a pathological pattern of behaviors which are about as close to that of coercive control as described by Evan Stark, signatory to the collective memo of concern, as it is possible to get. Take a look at this. Coercive control is when a person with whom you are personally connected repeatedly behaves in a way which makes you feel controlled, dependent, isolated, scared. When we examine the ways in which children in divorce and separation suffer abandonment threats by parents who are unhealthy or unable to contain their own emotional response to the crisis of separation, we can begin to understand how this pathological presentation, which looks like love and devotion, actually it's child abuse. As Craig says, when parent-child boundaries are violated, the implications for developmental psychopathology are significant. Poor boundaries interfere with the child's capacity to progress through development, which is a defining feature of childhood psychopathology, 2005. Imagine the scenario of the child whose parent is dependent upon them to keep them stable after divorce and separation. A child whose parent is keen to surround them with love and devotion, but at the same time conveys a message that unless the child takes care of their emotional needs, they're going to abandon them. The messages in this situation need not be even verbalized. The abandonment threat is there in the intention conveyed in the intrapsychic, the silent but powerful communications which occur between parent and child. A look, a shrug, the body language, a lot of inference and implication. So the alienator will say, well, I never said it. It may not have been explicitly stated, but it was clearly implied. The message which is given to the child is, I depend upon you to keep me stable. Don't leave me, don't betray me. To which the child can only respond in one way, which is to seek proximity and to submit to the parent. And at the same time, having to compartmentalize any feelings that they have that is of anger, frustration. In the event that what they're doing is that they have to split off parts of who they are in order to conform to the demands made by this parent, the alienator. As Janina Fisher, former supervisor at the Besser Vanderkolk Center, tells us, when attachment figures are abusive, the child's only source of safety and protection becomes simultaneously the source of immediate danger, leaving the child caught between two conflicting sets of instincts. On one hand, they are driven by attachment instincts to seek proximity, comfort, and protection. On the other hand, they are driven equally strong animal defense instincts to freeze, fight, flee, or submit, or disassociate before they get too close to the frightening parent. Fisher, 2017. My worry about the feminist academics who signed the collective memo of concern to the WHO is that they are driven not to understand the experience of children who reject a parent, but to ignore those and regard them as being immaterial to the overall project of protecting the rights of women. My other worry is that even in the drive to protect the rights of women, alienated mothers are simply thrown under the bus by the feminist denial of parental alienation. Thank you, Karen Woodall. Which means that alienated children and mothers and fathers who are rejected are all discarded in this distorted vision of the world. Karen, thank you, thank you. Fortunately, around the world, the increasing understanding of this is an urgent, hidden child abuse issue will not allow the silencing of those concerning the children's needs and their right to healthy relationships any longer. There are too many of us who know the truth of what has happened to children in divorce and separation in decades gone by to stop the shift towards recognition and treatment of children and families who have suffered this abuse. Alienated children are ignored and invisible no longer, and ideology has no part to play in the future development of work with these families. That is the message, that is the task, that is the road ahead practitioners in this space are traveling. Yes, thank you. It's about